What's up, everybody? I'm Katie.
And I'm Clark.
And this is For Your Misinformation, a podcast dedicated to making politics more accessible for everyday Americans. My goal is to empower people, especially women, to become more politically engaged so we can act in our own best interests. Let me identify the problem and tell you exactly how we can solve it. On Mondays, I break down topics like voter suppression, impeachment, and white supremacy, look to the experts in that field, and then talk about ways that we can help the most. That might be donating to a charitable organization, voting in a local election, going to a rally, following activists on social media, or whatever else we can think of. On Wednesdays, I highlight individual politicians, whether I support them, and who you might want to vote for instead. If you listened to the intro episode and decided this is your kind of thing, congratulations! We are going to save democracy. And I'm not kidding or exaggerating. I'm just choosing to be relentlessly optimistic. By taking baby steps every week, we're going to fight back to defeat Trump and his corrupt administration. Why? Because we have to. We are the ones who understand how dangerous Trump is. No more savior syndrome. No one is going to save us. We have to save ourselves. Fellow white women, especially, we have a lot of work to do. So you probably noticed that I have a co-host with me today. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Clark, and I'm a first-year student at University of Chicago for social work.
And who are you in relation to me?
Your boyfriend.
That's right. And you are also my favorite person and one of the most emotionally intelligent men that I have ever met.
Aw, thanks.
So you're just kind of here today to make sure that what I'm saying makes sense and ask questions as I go.
Got it.
Okay. So I mentioned gaslighting in the intro episode, but I want to talk about it a little bit more because I find it to be a very useful concept. The rest of the information on gaslighting in this episode is paraphrased from my favorite podcast, Gaslit Nation. To gaslight someone means to manipulate by psychological means into questioning their own sanity. It's not a new phenomenon. Marginalized groups have always felt it.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. So the most classic one that I think of when I think about Trump is when he lied about the size of his crowd at inauguration. There were pictures that proved the crowd size for his inauguration didn't come anywhere near close to Obama's, but he lied and pretended that it did, and made everyone else, including his press secretary, lie on his behalf. It seems stupid and harmless enough, but really it's a political weapon designed to make people question their own sanity. Another one that women get all the time is catcalling. If you've ever experienced catcalling and were taught to take it as a compliment, it's not a compliment, it is straight up harassment. So don't let anyone gaslight you into believing otherwise, but that is a topic for another day.
Okay.
So for the past 3 years especially, ever since Trump got elected, our country has undergone classic gaslighting on behalf of the government. That's part of the reason that I get so mad when the media calls Trump's lies falsehoods or his racist statements racially infused or whatever. Words matter, and we should call him what he is. He's a racist, sexist, liar, and also a malignant narcissist. There have always been politicians who lie and manipulation and corruption in government, but this is blatant and we've never seen it before, especially in conjunction with his use of social media.
So there are good and bad politicians, but how can you tell them apart?
So there are even good Democrats and bad Democrats. I feel like power tends to be a corrupting force. There are ones who are corrupted by money and power and influence, and then there are the ones who are in it for the right reasons. It's actually really easy to tell the difference if you pay attention. In your town, in your county, in your state, in our country, I guarantee there are people on the ballot running for the right reasons and for the wrong reasons. Mitch McConnell, Republican senator from Kentucky, you know, the one who looks like a turtle, he is the epitome of greed and corruption in government. Don't worry, there will be a whole episode dedicated to him and why Kentuckians should all vote for Amy McGrath instead. On the other hand, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a House rep from New York, is like the exact opposite of Mitch McConnell. AOC refuses to take any corporate donations, so you know she's truly governing on behalf of her constituents, as all politicians should. She isn't being influenced by the coal industry or big pharma or oil lobbyists, which you can't say as much for the rich old Republican men in Congress. So many of them take money from corporate PACs or political action committees. A lot of them get tons of money from the National Rifle Association, for example, including the good Republican politicians like Mitt Romney. Because the NRA can afford to buy politicians, afford being the key word here, in that we see over and over again how money buys influence in Washington in our current system. It only works for the rich and powerful who vote with their wallets in ways that we can't because we're worried about affording our health insurance this month. So Mitch McConnell has taken over $1 million from the NRA and conveniently won't bring gun sense legislation to a vote in the Senate. He's single-handedly decided that we as a country are not to do anything about gun violence. The House passed a background check bill almost a year ago, and he just won't bring it to a vote because the NRA owns him and a ton of other Republican senators. So even though the majority of Americans overwhelmingly support gun sense legislation, Mitch McConnell doesn't, so he just chooses not to bring it to a vote. The same problem of money in politics is why we aren't doing anything about climate change or reproductive justice or police brutality or any of the other stuff that I give a shit about.
So how do they get away with that?
Because we aren't an informed electorate, and even when we try to get informed, we're being gaslit by politicians. But the reality is that politicians are supposed to work for us. So on Wednesdays, I will highlight different politicians and tell you what you need to know. If you want me to highlight one of your reps, let me know at FYMIPod on Instagram or send me an email at FYMIPod@gmail.com. Without a doubt, though, I have to talk about Mitch McConnell first. God, I cannot stand him.
I know.
Okay, sorry, I got a little bit off topic, but today I would like to talk about white supremacy because it's basically at the core of every fucked up thing that's happening in our country right now. This episode airs on January 20th, 2020, exactly 1 year before inauguration. We have less than a year to get a white supremacist out of the White House. It is time for us to get our shit together. I want to read a quote from Michelle Williams' speech from the Golden Globes on January 5th. Women age 18 to 118, when it is time to vote, please do so in your self-interest. It's what men have been doing for years, which is why the world looks so much like them. But don't forget that we are the largest voting body in this country. Let's make it look more like us. I really love that quote, but I want to be specific. Women of color overwhelmingly voted for Clinton. They saw through Trump's bullshit immediately. It's the majority of white women who voted for Trump in 2016. 53%. Half. 1 in every 2. So talk to your friends. Make sure they understand what it means to vote in our self-interest. Rich old white dudes in Congress are trying to take away our right to choose, so let's take away their jobs. They're supposed to represent us, and they don't represent me or any of my friends. And if they think that they have a right to control my body, imagine what else they think they deserve to control. They shouldn't be legislating anything at all. So let's elect a more representative democracy, meaning everyone needs to get involved. If you're not sure how to talk about politics with your friends, feel free to refer them here. Maybe your sister or your cousin or your friend from a swing state wants to get more politically involved. My hope is that we can form a group to create positive change on a larger scale when we work together. I'm sure I'm not the only one who wants to get more involved. So let me tell you how and why, and together we'll make a bigger positive impact. The action steps might be to follow activists on social media or subscribe to your local newspaper, read a book, donate money, or even run for office. If we make it a regular habit to do what we can when we can, this country works better for everyone. Most of my thoughts in this episode were inspired by books I read this year. How to Be Less Stupid About Race by Crystal Fleming, The View from Flyover Country by Sarah Kendzior, and How to Start a Revolution by Lauren Duca, all of which I highly recommend. So here's the problem. We never really learn about white supremacy in school. Fellow white people, we need to talk about white supremacy. A class on race and ethnic relations should be required, but it's so rare. I took one class my sophomore year of college and got like a B-, so I don't feel like an expert, but technically I am because that's more than most people get. If that's not an option for you, read How to Be Less Stupid About Race by Crystal Fleming. Not only is it super interesting, but it is so funny. It's so important to have historical and sociological context when it comes to this topic, and if you're white, trust me, you have a lot to learn from her. If you don't want to buy the book, at least follow her on social media. This is a topic that I'm constantly shocked and appalled that I didn't learn more about in school. I'm going to talk a lot about racism in this episode, so if you're a white person like me, it's important to not get defensive right off the bat. I am not calling you a racist, although, I don't know, that's kind of the point, is that it's hard to tell. I'm simply explaining how we live in a nation founded on white supremacy and therefore live and operate within a racist society. I've got 12 points on politics and white supremacy that we either should have learned in school or what I would teach students today if I could. And I'm going to start with how to understand the rise of authoritarian states. To better understand Trump and this administration in general, we should have studied the rise of authoritarian states and violent populism around the world. We also should have studied state-sanctioned racist brutality in the United States towards Native Americans, Black Americans, and other marginalized groups. We have a racist system applied selectively based on your race, gender, class, status. This all started with slavery, but transformed into Jim Crow, mass incarceration of Black men, to the constant battle for voting rights. Voter suppression is one of the main tools of the white supremacist patriarchy, but more on that later. 2. We should have been taught that white mob violence has happened here. For years now, since Trump became mainstream, the tolerance of the media and Trump's base have been normalizing racist behavior and statements. Hate crimes are up. Trump is still in power because the media keeps letting liars appear on national TV and Republicans in Congress refuse to hold Trump accountable. 3. Republicans like it when Black people don't vote, so they use voter suppression as a tool of systemic white supremacy instead of lynching.
Why is it better for Republicans if Black people don't vote?
Because overwhelmingly, white people tend to vote conservative and people of color tend to vote liberal. So rather than change their policy opinions to better suit the majority of Americans, the Republicans in Congress try to rig the system.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So 4, white supremacy results in deaths. Charlottesville, that mosque in New Zealand, El Paso, that synagogue, all of these are examples of white supremacist violence that have resulted in deaths. If these crimes were perpetrated by Black or brown people, the media would definitely be referring to it by what it really is: terrorism. And we have a white supremacist in the White House. It's not a coincidence. Trump is empowering other white supremacists. 5. Within our racist society, it is not enough to be not racist. We have to be anti-racist if we ever want to make progress. Push back, don't be silent. Make a statement by walking away or say you don't appreciate whatever racist remarks they've made. Make them feel uncomfortable. 6. Unfortunately, white people rarely have friends of color, statistically speaking. This means we tend to live in white echo chambers. When the Civil War ended and Reconstruction began, white Americans had to stop being openly racist in public, but they were still able to be racist in private without facing any consequences. The data is pretty conclusive. Most white people have no Black friends. And until pretty recently, like a couple decades ago, it was totally cool and even legal to discriminate based on race. That didn't go away, it just transitioned into taking place in private places instead. That's one of the ways to make a difference, is to push back when you encounter situations like that. 7. Journalism is incredibly important to create an informed electorate. The state of American journalism is declining, especially among women and people of color. There are fewer journalism jobs, and the ones that still exist tend to go to white people, especially white men. So we know that white people typically don't have Black friends, and we're missing the perspectives of people of color in the media. That means we need to purposely get out of that bubble of a white echo chamber by seeking out minority voices.
Yeah, people of color tend to be better at spotting racism, just like women are better at spotting sexism.
Exactly. 8. We should have been taught how to identify white supremacists, because there are straight up white supremacists in the White House right now. And one of them is named Stephen Miller. There have been so many scandals with this White House that we just totally glossed over the fact that there is a proven, confessed white nationalist acting as Trump's senior policy advisor. He has to go. In the run-up to the 2016 election, Miller promoted white nationalist literature, pushed racist immigration stories, and obsessed over the loss of Confederate symbols. Which brings me to number 9. By the way, I'm gonna need all white people to stop defending the Confederate statues like they give a shit about states' rights. Those statues represent a time when our country used to think it was cool and okay to own slaves. We should not be proud of this time. There are no hateful statues commemorating Hitler in Germany. And that is how we should feel about slavery, but we don't get enough education around race and ethnic relations to understand how ridiculous it is that we have hundreds of Confederate statues in like our parks and shit. Stop accepting the argument that Civil War was a battle over states' rights. It was a war over whether people should be able to own other people, and spoiler, they shouldn't. Not an overreaction to be pissed about a Confederate flag or a statue because it's just a racist dog whistle to other racists who are mad that black people are being afforded more equal opportunities than they have in the past. I mean, what other war losers got statues? Enough. 10. The GOP won't call Trump out because they're cowards. They enjoy being in power too much. The most they can gather the courage to do, like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, is tweet their disapproval. But they're in Congress. They can do more than tweet if they actually gave a shit. They could actually pass legislation to hold Trump accountable, but they won't. And that's why they'd be the bad guys if this was a movie. They're just watching idly by as terrible racist, sexist shit happens that they could try to curb, but they don't because Trump keeps confirming conservative judges to the courts. So they're cool with his racist policies. It's gross, and I'm gonna keep talking into the void about it until everyone who was too cowardly to stand up to Trump is out of office. 11. Who is pursued for crimes in this country depends on class and race, so we have to think about intersectionality. Rich old white men almost never face accountability. They aren't even familiar with the word. When the laws don't suit those in power, they break them without consequence, or they rewrite the rules. #MeToo means rich old white men are sort of starting to face accountability, but I'm pretty sure Trump is still president, and as of today, Harvey Weinstein isn't behind bars, so are they really? And 12, the last point that I wish I'd learned sooner, voter suppression manifests a lot of different ways. It can look like fewer polling places in poor neighborhoods, which results in longer lines to vote. It's harder for shift workers to take off time to vote, and election day is on a Tuesday, which for some reason is not a federal holiday. In general, it's just typically more inconvenient for people of color to vote, which is by design. It's racism in action. So after hearing all this stuff, does Donald Trump represent you or anyone you know? No. So let's educate and empower ourselves and show him how we feel. Elect people who actually represent you. I know this is an intense one, but it's also really important. So let's be clear. Trump is racist and sexist, and anyone who tries to tell you differently is gaslighting you. An anti-racist activist, Heather Heyer, was murdered by a white supremacist terrorist in Charlottesville a couple of years ago, and Trump declared that there were many fine people on both sides. He's pulling the fringe to the center, and it's being normalized, and we can't let that happen. It's time for white women to stand up to Trump. In 2016, I think a lot of white women voted for him just because their boyfriends or their husbands did, but that's bullshit, and it better not happen again in November.
So what can we do to help?
Well, there's lots of different solutions. One, listen to the perspectives of people of color. Follow journalists and activists who don't look like you. If you need some ideas on where to start, you can begin by following all the people I thank in my outro. They're not all journalists or people of color, but they get it, you know? 2, you can be anti-racist. Push back when you experience hate and know your shit so you can't be pushed around. When your racist aunt says something about trickle-down economics, tell her it's a myth and back it up with facts. It didn't work when Reagan was in office, and it doesn't work now. 3, read How to Be Less Stupid About Race by Crystal Fleming and do everything that she says. 4, subscribe to Gaslit Nation and do everything that Sarah Kendzior and Andrea Chalupa say. And 5, if you really want to make a difference, donate to Fair Fight 2020. It's the organization I donate to when the state of the world is making me sad. Fair Fight 2020 was founded by Stacey Abrams and is the nation's only organization focused on promoting free and fair elections through litigation, legislation, and advocacy that brings high-impact campaign strategies to make elections fair for all. Because voter suppression is one of the major tools of white supremacy used to disenfranchise voters of color in particular. Donate money to Fair Fight 2020 and Stacey Abrams. If you tag me in your Instagram stories, I'll definitely repost it. And keep in mind, you don't have to solve every problem. You just have to pick one thing. Take it one step at a time. So Clark, if I donate $20 to Fair Fight 2020, will you?
Absolutely.
Oh, hell yeah. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please tell a friend. That would really, really help me out. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter at For Your Misinformation Podcast, or you can send questions and feedback in an email to fymipod@gmail.com. Tune in every Mondays and Wednesdays for new episodes. Shout out to Hope Dye for the podcast art, Kyle Dibdahl for the intro and outro music, and Ben Schlofelt for the audio production, and Clark Holiday for co-hosting. I'd like to thank Lauren Duca, Sarah Kenzier, Andrea Chalupa, Brene Brown, Lizzo, AOC, Nancy Pelosi, Karen Kilgariff, Georgia Hardstark, Marie Newman, and my mom for their inspiration. And I'd like to thank you for listening.